In this issue, I would like to explain the theme, why did the Industrial Revolution take place in England? First, a brief description of the Industrial Revolution that took place in England. The Industrial Revolution in England began around the late 18th century. How Britain changed after the Industrial Revolution. The people's lives changed from agriculture to industry. And it is a revolution that resulted in an increase in national power through the creation of silk products using silk products. However, a question arises here. That is, why did the Industrial Revolution occur in England and not in China, Japan, etc.? In fact, the reasons why the Industrial Revolution took place in England are not understood and there is no clear reason. To answer this question, I would like to examine the reasons why the Industrial Revolution took place in England based on the keyword plague. First of all, I would like to conclude that I believe that the plague bacillus was responsible for the Industrial Revolution in England.
For those who do not know about the plague bacillus, I will first give a brief description of the plague bacillus. The plague was an epidemic that swept across Europe, mainly in the 14th and 15th centuries, killing about 1/3 of the European population and decimating the entire European population. This virus is also known as the Black Death, and has the frightening aspect of turning the entire body black and dying. Such epidemics began around the 14th century, and the population of Europe plummeted, especially in England, where about half of the entire population died from the plague bacillus. In fact, the population of England in 1300 was estimated to have been around 5 million, but the plague reduced the number of citizens to about 2.5 million.
This is a brief description of the plague bacillus. At that time, more than 90% of the people in England were farmers, and the remaining 10% were merchants, aristocrats, and others. At that time, peasants were of a very low class, also known as serfs, and were forced to live a slave-like life and suffer hardships. The change in their ranks came after the plague epidemic. Earlier I mentioned that the plague bacillus killed half of the British population, which led to a drastic decrease in the number of farmers. Fewer farmers means fewer people to grow crops, which could lead to a situation that could threaten the very existence of the country. Hence, the decrease in the number of farmers significantly reduced Britain's national strength. Gradually, the scarcity of peasants grew to the point where they were in a position to express their opinions to the nobility. It is important to note here that the plague epidemic reduced national power and lowered the status of the nobility, but significantly raised the status of the peasants. Thus, around the 17th century, the Puritan Revolution took place, in which people who had been serfs started a revolution and overthrew an absolute monarchy. Thanks to this revolution, the status of serf was eliminated, and in its place, independent and self-employed peasants began to appear. They are freed from being slaves, serfs, and therefore must pay a small land fee. And since there was a surplus of land at the time, more production from the land was directly related to a higher source of income. This has led to a dramatic increase in productivity with the creation of independent and self-employed farmers. Hence, around the 18th century, when the Industrial Revolution took place, British farmers were able to lead a fairly affluent life. Then, in the late 18th century, with the advent of the spinning loom, the people's work changed from agriculture to industry, and the country as a whole began to prosper. This is the process that led to the Industrial Revolution. At first glance, the Industrial Revolution is often perceived as a revolution with benefits for the people, but in reality, there are also disadvantages. That is, the development of industrialization has widened the gap between the rich and the poor, between capitalists and workers. In the early years of the Industrial Revolution, capitalists had overwhelming power, and workers were forced to work for cheap wages. It feels like the second coming of the serfs. Thus, the Industrial Revolution is a complex revolution with advantages and disadvantages. Now, let me summarize the contents of this issue. I suspect that if the plague had not spread and the number of people had not decreased, it probably would have taken longer for the serfs to be abolished and the Industrial Revolution would not have. I thought that if this had happened in Japan as it did in the UK, there might have been an Industrial Revolution in another field.